Well, everybody, I apologize for the delay, but it looks like it's time to finally head back to the Castlevania series. When last we met, we took a look at the second of the three titles for the Game Boy Advance, Harmony of Dissonance. While it definitely wasn't the toughest game in the series, it did make several quality of life improvements over its predecessor, Circle of the Moon, that made it a smoother experience overall that I can still easily recommend checking out if you haven't already. Unfortunately, that smoother experience and the glowing critical reception didn't translate into the strongest of sales for the sophomore GBA entry, selling only about 300,000 copies, give or take, worldwide. A sharp decline from the previous game's 1 million plus. Despite this, though, the game was still a commercial success in North America, where it enjoyed most of its sales, so the series was allowed to continue on the following year. In fact, the year 2003 would see two games, the PS2 exclusive Lament of Innocence, and the topic of this review, Aria of Sorrow, the third and final installment on the Game Boy Advance. Once again developed by Konami's Tokyo studio, responsible for the previous game, Harmony of Dissonance, and what many consider the crown jewel of the series, Symphony of the Night. And also, once again, the footage you're seeing is from the Nintendo Wii U eShop version. This game does something that the series has never done before. Take place in the future. Or at least the future when it was released. Give it another decade or so and this game will be set in the past too. Anyway, the year is 2035 and we join our protagonist, 18-year-old Japanese high school student Soma Cruz. The game says he's a transfer student studying abroad in Japan, but this is actually a mistranslation. He's visiting the family shrine of his best friend Mina Hakuba during a solar eclipse when suddenly, the two of them are, without warning, transferred to a strange castle. It's revealed by the mysterious government agent Genya Arikado that the two of them are inside the castle of the one and only Count Dracula, which was sealed inside of this solar eclipse. But before Soma can get any more answers, they are attacked by a large group of monsters, and when Soma kills the last remaining one, he absorbs the soul of that monster and gains its power. Setting foot in Dracula's castle appears to have awakened a new power within Soma that he's gone his whole life never knowing he had. The power of dominance, or the power to use the abilities of Dracula's monsters. I'll touch on that in greater detail later. Soma is directed by Arikado to find the Master's Chambers of the castle if he wants to get Mina and himself back to Earth, and this is where the game begins. In addition to Arikado, you'll also meet up with a few new characters. One with a very familiar name if you're a fan of this series. A member of the church named Yoko Belnades, a very, very distant descendant of Sypha Belnades from Castlevania 3, or the Netflix series. Before you run into her, though, you meet another guy who managed to find his way inside the solar eclipse named Graham Jones, who looks like he can be completely trusted and is totally not gonna be the villain later, trust me. And later, we meet a mysterious man who goes only by Jay. He can't remember his real name because he was involved in an accident in the year 1999, which gave him amnesia. But he becomes fearful when the name Dracula is uttered, so he's come to Dracula's castle to essentially jog his memory, as he feels Dracula himself might have been involved. But if I go into more detail into that, I'll be going into spoiler territory, so I'll save that for later. Don't worry, I'll give you a heads up if you don't want to be spoiled. Alright, so if you've played Symphony of the Night, or hell, any of the other games that came after that, then you already know exactly what to expect here. Side-scrolling action, monster slaying, and the occasional platform jumping, all across a sprawling castle with varied environments, sometimes needing to acquire a special ability to progress further or access a previously unreachable level in an earlier one. all while battling monsters to gain experience points to level up, and equipping armor and accessories to boost your stats. Though, unlike the previous two GBA games, you won't be using a whip as your only weapon this time around. Taking a page from Symphony, you'll have access to a whole host of different weapons, including 1- and 2-handed swords, both of the short and long varieties, lances, hammers, punching weapons. There's even a couple of different handguns in the game. Don't get too excited. The one found in the game's normal mode is literally the single weakest weapon in the whole game. But still, seeing a regular-ass pistol in a Castlevania game is pretty surreal. There may not be any regular whips this time around, but you do happen across some sort of whip sword, and it's actually a pretty useful early game weapon. The major thing to take into account is that there are weapons that are swung horizontally, like the short and long swords and the lances, and ones that are swung vertically, like great swords and hammers. They vary from attack power, reach, and speed, so all of these need to be taken into account when you equip them. Would you rather attack quickly at a reasonable range at the cost of a little bit of attack power, or would you rather do a lot of damage at short range at a reduced speed? And there are also some weapons that have elemental effects, which, you guessed it, can deal more damage to enemies of certain elemental alignments. I forgot to bring this up when I looked at Harmony of Dissonance, but many enemies have an element that they're aligned with, and attacking with the opposite element will do extra damage. So yeah, Pokemon rules are in play there. But the real major shakeup with this installment is the introduction of what the game calls the Tactical Soul system. Whenever you slay an enemy, there's a chance their soul will be released, and once acquired, you'll have access to a special ability when that soul is equipped. So, yeah, you familiar with that shard system in Bloodstained Ritual of the Night? Yeah, it's literally the exact same idea here. That concept originated here. There are 4 types of souls. The red ones are called bullet souls, which allow you to use some kind of special attack when pressing up on the D-pad and pressing the attack button. The sub-weapons from the previous games are replaced with these bullet souls, instead using your MP meter rather than a separate heart counter. Then you have your blue ones, which are called Guardian Souls, which you activate by pressing the right shoulder button. These ones can grant abilities like protective force fields, slowing your descent, or any other kind of effect that can help protect you, as long as you have the MP to spare. Then there's the yellow Enchanted Souls, which, when equipped, will provide a consistent passive skill like a stat increase or an ability to walk underwater that does not require MP to use. And finally, the silver Ability Souls, which can be found in these little containers and, on occasion, a specific enemy, and they grant you new abilities like the double jump, the slide, and the backdash, which are needed to access new places you otherwise couldn't reach and further explore the castle. These are, effectively, what replaced the relics from the previous 2 games. Every monster in the game has an equipable soul, though the drop rate on a lot of them are a lot lower than others, so if you're after a particular enemy's soul, you'll more than likely find yourself killing that same enemy over and over and over again until you finally get it. Though that's not to say you won't find some super useful and powerful skills just by playing the game normally. There's a lot of variety in both the weapons and the Tactical Soul system, and it can lead to a pretty wide range of experimentation. Combining this with the extensive arsenal, I feel like everybody's going to be playing this game just a little bit differently. You're sure to find a few favorite weapons and souls. One neat feature this game has is the ability to trade souls with another player via the soul trade function. Think of it like trading Pokemon. There I go, mentioning Pokemon again. Where you and a friend who also owns the game can trade via the link cable in case one of you is having a hard time finding a particular soul. I never used it personally, but I figured it was worth mentioning anyway. I find that this game really hits that sweet spot in terms of its difficulty. It's not the most brutally hard game in the series, but it will give you a pretty decent challenge this time around. The game's difficulty seems way more gradual this time around. It eases you into it before hitting you with the harder areas with the tougher enemies and bosses later on, as a good game should. On that note, Unlike Harmony, you can't stockpile healing items this time around. You're only allowed to carry up to 9 of a certain type of item at any given time. But on the plus side, the game's shop, which is run by a former army soldier named Hammer, is located in exactly one spot throughout the whole game, so you can't miss him. He's literally at the entrance of the castle that's easy to get back to once you've unlocked the teleport rooms. Overall, it just feels like a more balanced game. I never felt like I had to level grind, but I still felt like I needed to be on my toes at all times. As you might imagine, the later levels can definitely get harder, but I never found them frustratingly so. There is a level about halfway through the game that does try to trip you up by having the exits warp you to other parts of the level, but this is the only time the game ever does that, and the level itself isn't very big either. The only other major area that may give players some trouble is the seemingly obligatory clock tower level, with its moving platforms and Medusa heads that fly across the screen, the golden ones turning you to stone, but this level is more annoying than hard. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the levels later. I've got more I want to say about them. I think now's a good time to talk about the thing that I'm sure you've long noticed by now, the visuals. Or rather, the aesthetics in general. I stand by my statement that the Castlevanias on GBA are among the best looking games on the system, and Aria is definitely no exception. The character and enemy sprites are noticeably smaller than they were in Harmony, but the backgrounds still look very detailed for a sprite-based game. Just maybe not as much previously. The game is still very capable of some impressive looking special effects though. Soma's running animation is the smoothest and most detailed protagonist animation in the whole GBA trilogy. And the enemies animate pretty well too, for the most part. Maybe not so much the supporting cast, but you're not going to be seeing them walking all that often anyway. Though the sprite sizes may have been scaled down from last time, this does come with a positive effect. The game's music now sounds more full and less like an 8-bit NES game. And of course, since this is a Castlevania game, the music is fantastic. Lots of new personal favorites here. Konami Tokyo found that balance of having good graphics that are easy to see on a GBA screen, I presume, and having a good quality soundtrack to go with it. They even managed to squeeze in some voice samples here and there. Granted, it's all in Japanese, so I don't know what they're saying, but it's there. It was in Harmony of Dissonance too, which is impressive considering they had to cut down the audio quality of that game so much. So, with the visuals being so good for a GBA game, that of course means that the levels themselves are quite lovely to look at as well. Despite the game taking place in the year 2035, the castle itself hasn't had an interior decorator inside of it since at least the early 1900s. That goth aesthetic is still very much strong here, and it leads to some very good-looking areas. One of my personal favorites is the inner quarters, where you run into these maid enemies that'll bow before attacking you. The combination of the way this level looks and the song that plays over it leads to an environment that looks both cozy and dangerous at the same time. The boss fight here against the Headhunter is probably my favorite one in the whole game. You walk into this room with shelves full of severed heads, and the boss has 3 phases, one with a different kind of head, that are all totally unique from each other. Another one of my favorites from an aesthetic standpoint is the floating garden. I'm a really big fan of the dark blue color scheme used here in this level. This is the level that throws that dirty trick at you by having some of the exits lead to different rooms if you enter them a certain way, but again, this is the only level that ever does that, and once you figure out the pattern, it's not bad at all. One part of the game that really stuck out to me was in the short underground cemetery portion right before the boss fight with the Legion. The game's music just stops playing, and you find yourself in a room full of these walking corpses that you can't interact with. It's this really unsettling scene where you just see them walking off screen and making really uncomfortable groaning noises. Like, this one short couple of rooms genuinely skeeved me out. Where the game will really start to kick your ass is when you're nearing the last quarter. The arena level throws some really tough enemies at you, And there are some optional accessories you can grab from these rooms next to the elevator, but oh boy, do these levels want you dead. Now, granted, you don't have to get these particular items, but they will prove to be a big help if you do. Hell, I was only able to grab one of them without dying. And then when you get to the Master's Chambers finally, yeah, now we're kind of starting to get into spoiler territory now. And I don't usually spoil or discuss the endings of the games I play, but since this one ties into the gameplay and the effect it may have on one's ability to get the game's true ending, I'm gonna go ahead and just discuss all of the game's big revelations and discuss the endings. So if you don't want to be spoiled on an almost 20-year-old game, you can go ahead and just use this time code right here to skip ahead past all the spoilery stuff. Right? We good? Okay, so here's the plot. Let's start back with that Graham Jones fella. Early in the game, Yoko tells you to be wary of him because he believes that he will inherit Dracula's powers from this castle. You'll later find out from Graham himself that the reason he thinks so is because in 1999, he was born the exact moment that Dracula was destroyed permanently. And because of that, he believes himself to be the reincarnation of Dracula. And on that note, how ballsy is it for a series to permanently kill off its major recurring antagonist after so many games? That'd be like if the Legend of Zelda series permanently killed off Ganon. Anyway, later on you find out that Jay has managed to regain his memories completely, and he reveals to Soma his full name, Julius Belmont, the as of now currently last known Belmont, and that he was the one who landed the finishing blow that destroyed Dracula for good back in 1999. His whip, the vampire killer, sealed away inside the castle to prevent Dracula's return. The game alludes to a big huge battle that took place in the year 1999 that destroyed Dracula permanently, and it seems like it would have been a great game in its own right, but it never happened. Fans of the series are still clamoring for this game based on what's called the Demon Castle War. So if you hear fans talking about something called the Battle of 1999 or just the 1999 game, this is what they're referring to. Everything comes to a head when you run into Graham in the underground reservoir, stabbing Yoko. Luckily, Arikado is nearby and manages to get Yoko to safety while Soma chases Graham to the Master's Chambers in the castle's top floor. Yeah, who would have thought that the character named after Billy Graham and Jim Jones would be the villain? Now, throughout the game, you may have picked up at least one of these ancient books. These are hints as to what monster souls you need to have equipped onto you when you go and fight Graham in the Master's Chambers. You don't need to have all 3 books, but you do have to have all 3 souls equipped onto you during the first phase of the fight, or else the game will lock you into this sort of false ending. I'm just gonna go ahead and tell you so you don't wander around lost like I did the first time I played this game. It's the Giant Bat, Flame Demon, and Succubus souls you need. You'll more than likely already have them just from playing the game normally, but the game doesn't tell you you have to have them all equipped at the same time in order to get the game's true ending. Also, I just want to comment on the third phase of the fight here. He turns into this friggin' thing. If I'd have seen this when I was younger, this for sure would have given me nightmares. When you have all 3 souls equipped and you finish Graham off, Soma absorbs all of the dark energy that Graham was holding on to, which causes Soma to make a startling discovery: that he is the reincarnation of Dracula. Soma's soul and Dracula's powers are one and the same, and if Soma doesn't want it to overtake him completely and have him become the new de facto Dracula, then he'll need to cut off the source of chaos that's influencing the evil spirit within him, wherein you'll go to the game's real last level, but not before having a tough fight against Julius, who's surprisingly still agile for being well into his 50s. This final stage is pretty short, but it's pretty cool to see that it's composed largely of pieces of previous levels inside of a monochrome void world. But you're going to want to make sure you're prepared and loaded up on as many healing items as you can get before trying to tackle the final boss. Don't make the same mistake I did and not go back and buy healing items after the fight with Julius. The first phase of this 2-phase fight has you at a disadvantage because it strips you of all the souls you've acquired up to this point, and you have to destroy all 3 of these little container things to get them back. All the while, a bunch of visual garbage is thrown at you, and it gets to a point where the hardest part of it all is just trying to keep track of all the crap flying at you. Also, if you die at any point during this boss fight, not only does it give you this admittedly pretty cool bad ending, but you have to sit through an unskippable credits roll, so if you're actually making an effort to beat the boss, you're gonna want to make sure you're geared up proper. Oh boy, that was a long segment. But it all does pose an interesting question. Had the mainline, non-spin-off Castlevania series continued past 2008 with Igarashi Sensei still in charge, where would the series have gone after this point? Well, there were more mainline games under his leadership after this. Actually, you know what? This is probably a topic for its own video. Now, to sum it all up, in case I haven't made it clear enough already, if I had to pick which of the 3 GBA Vanias is the best, even with Circle of the Moon being the closest to my heart personally, and with how much more accessible Harmony of Dissonance is, I can still very easily say that Aria of Sorrow is the best of the 3, hands down. Not just for the amount of experimentation and playstyle?
Ha 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 ha! You are no match for my style!
Not just for the amount of experimentation and playstyle choices this game allows, but it feels like the most balanced and polished of the 3 as well. This game will probably take you somewhere in the ballpark of 8 to 9 hours to get to the end. For me, the playthrough for this video took me about 5.5. Beating the game unlocks hard mode and an optional mode where you get to play as Jay. Only thing is, there's not really any story content, and you can't use the shop, or use healing items, or even pause the game. So yeah, have fun with that. This game is often placed right alongside Symphony of the Night as one of the absolute best the series has to offer. And in my personal opinion, I'd say Aria even surpasses Symphony, and is a must-play if you love Metroidvanias, or if you're just looking for a rock-solid side-scrolling action-adventure with RPG elements. I would just advise against trying to get a physical copy because those prices are just unacceptably high. Thank God for that advanced collection. Actually, you know what? I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't at least mention the Advanced Collection, which was released back in 2021, so let's take a quick look at that. The Castlevania Advanced Collection is exactly what it sounds like. A collection of all 3 GBA titles released together on one, well, collection. And I'm just gonna go ahead and say it. This is the best and cheapest way of playing these 3 games today. On top of having these 3 already great games on one collection, the game also keeps track of a few things that make gameplay much more helpful. In Circle of the Moon, it'll keep track of what enemies have what DSS card and if you have them already or not. Same with the souls in Aria of Sorrow. And yes, the DSS glitch in Circle of the Moon is still there. Though the soul trade is straight up removed from this collection. This handy little pop-up will help you keep track of all of that, but if you find it too distracting, you can always turn it off. The Advanced Collection also has the usual extras and quality of life implementations like an art gallery, a music player, save states, different options for your screen display, and an ability to rewind gameplay in case you make a mistake. And for only $20, you're getting all of that, plus 3 of the GBA's best games. And Dracula X. Yeah, the pared-down Super Nintendo port of Rondo of Blood, the original of which was only included in the PS4 exclusive Requiem collection with Symphony. I don't even know why that's the way it is. From what I've played so far, Dracula X is fine. But if I want a Super Nintendo Castlevania, personally, I'll just play Super Castlevania 4. But I'm just glad this collection exists, because now these games are all more readily available without breaking the bank. These are some of my personal favorite games, as I've rather exhaustively gone over, and I'm just so glad that more people can easily play them now. The next collections I want to see made would be for the DS trilogy, and for the 2 PS2 games, which I think are worth playing. Here's hoping that a collection for at least the DS games gets made someday, because those games are way too good to be trapped on dead hardware. Oh, and if you're wondering if I'm going to cover those games in the future, the answer is yes, someday. Hopefully by then Konami will have announced a collection for those games, but I guess for now we'll just have to wait and see. In the meantime, I think I'm about tapped out on Castlevania. I really hope you enjoyed my look back on this particular section of the series. Let me know in the comments which Castlevania game is your favorite and why. I'll see you all in the next one, and as always, thanks for watching.